I made it. Thank you again for being here and for being so supportive. I feel unusually comfortable right now. I think it's because you're so welcoming. If you've ever lost, please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm going to try to speak up as loud as I can. If you've ever lost a loved one or something that held deep meaning for you, what was the one thing that helped you through your grief? Jay, my husband, and I were together for 32 years. We met in medical school and graduated and enjoyed our separate practices. Then one day, my 54-year-old husband had difficulty driving his car home from work. He suddenly couldn't see anything on the right side. He made it to Rhode Island Hospital, and they found a large brain tumor. Glioblastoma. His cancer prognosis was about a year to live. His world fell apart that day. He had to have urgent surgery and would never be able to walk or see normally again. And tearfully, he had to give up his medical practice, which he loved dearly. He would require numerous brain surgeries, rounds of radiation, chemotherapy, and clinical trials. It was hard to watch all those interventions eventually fail. He miraculously survived for 5 years. Unfortunately, I was unable to keep him at home, even though I was a specialist in palliative and hospice care. His pain and symptoms were so severe that the hospice team had me admit him to inpatient hospice in Providence. Within one day, he could no longer communicate with me. He was there for 10 days. I sat with him daily, with family and friends who rotated being at his bedside around the clock. Then on the 10th day, I lay next to him on his hospice bed. His breathing stopped. His heart stopped. And I felt his warm body go cold as he died peacefully. Then everything fell apart for me. My life suddenly felt chaotic and confusing. I hadn't prepared myself for what it would be like after he died. We did almost everything together for 32 years. I no longer wanted to care for myself, return to work, live in our home, or even go to church. I could barely stay in touch with family and disconnected from many friends. But I will share the wisdom I gained from that experience after I share one more story. Coretta Scott King was the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., the preeminent leader of nonviolent protests in the US in the 1950s and 1960s, a Nobel Prize recipient and a prominent human rights and anti-Vietnam War activist. In her biography, she describes how Martin needed her to be his rock in order to have the strength to succeed. She cherished that responsibility and found her strength in overcoming difficult experiences. Her entire life, things kept falling apart, and she had to work hard to make everything come back together again. Coretta grew up in rural Alabama. She worked picking cotton in the fields as a child. She experienced much racial injustice as a child in the rural South. At age 15, her family home with all their possessions was burnt to the ground by racist terrorists in the area. Her tears flowed as she was very upset and probably very angry. Then her dad told her to be grateful that they had their lives and to forgive the perpetrators. She didn't know if she could forgive them, but she said the words to please her father as she began to learn forgiveness under extreme circumstances. She noticed that her father didn't complain and chose to show love towards the perpetrators. Later, she learned another lesson from her father when racist burned down his lumber mill only 2 weeks after he started his business. It was the first business ever owned by a black man in that region of Alabama. Her dad once again was able to respond with forgiveness, and he worked hard to start over again without complaining. She developed inner strength and determination and strongly desired to improve herself and help right the injustices that she experienced while living in Alabama. Her parents instilled in her a strong faith in God. She prayed often, meditated, enjoyed quiet time in the woods, and in college, she learned about the Quaker faith and related to its practice of stillness and experiencing the divine through introspection and silent contemplation. This became an important aspect of her faith. Hardship helped her to find meaning and purpose. She became a human rights activist, a pacifist, and a vocalist who performed frequently even before she met her husband. She met Martin Luther King Jr., and they married in 1953. They moved to the South after marriage, and Martin's activism propelled him to the spotlight, which resulted in constant threats to his life. In fact, September 20, 1958, Martin Luther King was in a bookstore signing his latest book. A woman came up to him, opened her purse, pulled out a letter opener, and plunged it into his chest. He was rushed to the hospital and underwent surgery, and his life was saved. Coretta realized how risky his work was and how she could lose him at any time. Other tragedies occurred, such as their house being bombed, receiving harassing phone calls almost nightly, sometimes with death threats. Her husband was often arrested and thrown into jail, marching for civil rights. She feared that he might not get out of jail alive because many black men in the South didn't. It was all very stressful for her. In the weeks prior to his assassination, he frequently said to her, "I will die an early death." It was painful for her to hear those words. She loved him very much. However, she intensely supported the movement of nonviolent resistance. She and Martin learned a lot while meeting with Gandhi during their pilgrimage to India. She fervently supported civil rights, stood up for the poor, and against injustice and the Vietnam War. Coretta Scott King felt God had called her to stand up against injustice by supporting her husband, marching, speaking, performing with her beautiful singing voice, and caring for her children. She said she would continue to do this no matter how hard it got. She was committed to not complaining, but simply doing what she had to do, even if it meant risking her life or the life of her family. Anything to move the cause forward. On April 4, 1968, at age 39, Coretta Scott King's husband was assassinated by gunshot wound to the head. He died before she could make it to his bedside, which was terribly hard for her. That's when everything fell apart for her. She was a single mom now with 4 children. Earlier, I asked for you to think of the one thing that helped you through your grief. That may be what's best for you. There's no right answer, but I'd like to share 4 additional things to do that can make a big difference. What happened to me, what happened to Coretta, and what may help you are the things that I want to talk about right now. Number 1, self-love and self-care. When we experience grief, it's important to know that everyone grieves in their own way. It's important to know that there is no one right way or wrong way to grieve. Initially, it may be so painful that you can barely take care of yourself, and that's normal. It is important to take care of yourself. Even as hard as it may be, it's important to learn to say to yourself, I love you. This is hard. It's okay to feel what I feel. You may need to cry. You may need to get angry. You may need to feel sad. You may need to express emotions in your own way. Self-love and self-care help grieving by helping us to get unstuck as we respond in a loving way to thoughts and behaviors of perfectionism, guilt, shame, regret, judgment of self, and judgment of others. Loving yourself through grief will not take away the grief, but it will help you to counterbalance the pain with some tenderness. Coretta Scott King's hardships created confidence and self-love. She knew that she was loved and chosen by God. She was able to allow for self-care by accepting the resources of her spiritual community, friends, and family to help provide for her and for her children. This was critical to her well-being as she grieved. Follow your heart when it comes to self-care and self-love. Remember the quote by Eleanor Brown: self-care is not selfish. You may find that taking care of yourself involves getting more rest, eating healthy food, having quiet time, meditating, asking others for help, or accepting help from others. It's about connecting with a source of inner strength that aligns with your beliefs. Number 2, meaning. Finding meaning. David Kessler, a world-famous grief specialist, states that finding meaning in our grief is very important to healing our grief after loss. Coretta Scott King found meaning in her life by connecting strongly to her purpose with determination and passion as she felt God had called her. 4 days after her husband was killed, she was able to lead a march in Memphis on behalf of the sanitation workers. And 3 weeks after her husband's death, she spoke at an anti-war rally in New York City's Central Park. In the days and weeks that followed her death, she calmed the anger and despair of Martin Luther King's followers and urged recommitment to the philosophy of nonviolence. She walked in his place at marches. She spoke at civil rights and anti-Vietnam War protests. She supported improving the conditions of the poor. She also committed to taking an unprecedented stand against homophobia. In his book, Finding Meaning, David Kessler states that meaning matters and meaning heals. He states that some people find meaning in belief of the afterlife, others in the memories of their loved ones, and others simply by being able to be present for their loved one in their last hours. I found meaning in being with my husband in the moment of his death. I found meaning in how much we were cared for by family, friends, colleagues, and coworkers because of their incredible loving support. I found meaning because I learned how to love someone with all my heart without needing anything in return. I found meaning because I learned how to be a more caring, patient, kinder person. I discovered that I could sit in silence with others, show empathy, and support them in a way that I never could have done before I experienced my own grief. I also found meaning in sharing my husband's stories. He often told me, "Be kind to others, even if they don't deserve it." I find great meaning in my life not only with sharing this story, but also with living it. I sometimes perform random acts of kindness for someone unexpectedly, and that feels good. This leads me to fundamental number 3. Number 3, kindness. Kindness has been shown to shift one's focus from internal pain to outward connections. It can increase joy that counteracts sadness. Kindness causes an increase in serotonin and dopamine. These are neurotransmitters that activate the pleasure centers in your brain. And this helps you to feel good. Kindness directed toward yourself is nurturing and promotes healing. When you are able to show kindness towards others, it can help generate a sense of connection and purpose. It is often not possible to do this initially during the grieving process, but when you are able, it can be uplifting. And number 4, gratitude. Gratitude can break the cycle of constant negative thoughts that bring you down. Studies have indicated that gratitude also increases dopamine and serotonin. According to psychologist Madalena Roy Chuduri, focusing on the positive aspects of life while still experiencing pain and sadness can help reduce depression, increase resilience, and increase the ability to process loss. Gratitude helps us to acknowledge our losses while celebrating what brings joy in our lives. This can be transformative, and this can help us to heal our grief. Gratitude practices such as journaling, savoring our special moments, writing about what you are grateful for, and setting time aside to share with others what you are thankful for are ways to express gratitude in your life. In summary, there are many ways to provide support when things fall apart in our lives. Some people develop a strong connection to God. Others find strength in connection to universe, love, mystery, the spirit of life, or interpersonal connections of family, friends, or a beloved community. These connections strengthen our spirits and give us hope as we unite through supportive and loving relationships. I want to conclude by recognizing that there are many different, various sources of sorrow. I see the pain in the faces of thousands of people who have lost everything in the California fires. And many of us are currently grappling with grief over the last election and the upcoming inauguration. Many of us feel like everything is indeed falling apart. But even in times like these, I hope this wisdom about grief can guide us through these challenging moments. Practicing self-love and self-care, finding meaning in our losses, engaging in acts of kindness towards ourselves and towards others, and creating a gratitude practice can help us heal and support ourselves and support others, fostering an environment where the pieces can fall back together again.